Hey guys, this is Joshua. This is my video on APUSH Unit 6 through 9. I made an error in the last one. I said that Dred Scott, um, what was it? Dred Scott v. Stanford was about like separate but equal. That's wrong. That's about like slaves being property, which made slavery basically legal. Um, for this video, we'll talk about post-Civil War South to the end of the Cold War and how politics change, reform changes, and our role as a global power. In the South, Henry Brady coined the idea of the New South because the Southerners, they saw that the North was really industrialized. They tried to get on that, but it failed because the South has been super entwined in agriculture for so long. It's not easy to change the economy like that. Sharecropping replaced slavery. I talked about that in the last video, trapping blacks and poor white farmers in debt for a very long time. We saw the 14th Amendment, right, in the last units, but there's still black codes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and poll taxes, which reinforce racial hierarchies. We have the rise of the KKK, we have Jim Crow laws, et cetera, et cetera. We have Plessy v. Ferguson, where the SCOTUS upheld the separate but equal. Under the 14th Amendment, this basically justified segregation insofar as like education standards would be different, food safety standards, or again, no, sorry, like restaurants, transportation, stuff like that. We get some reformers in this time period. We have Ida B. Wells, who writes a lot of journalism against lynching. Booker T. Washington, who's all about self-improvement. He's more like the silent reformer, if you will. Like basically focus on the self, and then like America will see how great Black people are. W.E.B. Du Bois creates the NAACP, National Advancement of American Colored People, I think, and he advocates for voting rights. He's much more radical than Booker T. Washington. He wanted like actual protest. We'll see like a more stark differentiation with MLK and Malcolm X on like what protest looks like. Now we talk about westward expansion. Okay. So after the Civil War, there's still the frontier in the West to be open. So we give out the Homestead Act, which was basically very cheap land to go out there. With the creation of the Transcontinental Railroad, we have the mining industry, ranching, grove expansion, etc. But the problem was a lot of land was poor, so corporations just took control. Farmers would go out, see that the soil was really bad, then sell it typically to the railroads, which will lead to like the populist movement a little later. Native Americans faced a bunch of broken treaties and violence. We wanted to assimilate with them with the Dawes Act, but that didn't work out, so we killed them all with the Wounded Knee Massacre and some other things. There was also the gold rush, which attracted a lot of immigrants, especially from China and Western Europe, which leads to the Chinese Exclusion Act because there were so many of them. And of course, throughout all of American history, there's going to be some nativist backlash. This is manifested, I believe, in the Know Nothing Party. We get into the Gilded Age, where corporations and monopolies are running the economy. In this time period, all the presidents are basically giving the laissez-faire, hands-off approach, which is why we see these monopolies and people become so strong. Railroad, steel, and oil specifically, which is why we have such rapid industrialization, electricity going up, cities being built super quickly. The Bessemer process made steel viable and much faster. We have the telephone and electricity. Specifically, you should know Carnegie, Rockefeller, JP Morgan. Carnegie implemented vertical integration, where you own every single step of the production process. Rockefeller, he had trust funds in Standard Oil, which led him to have, I think, like 95% of the U.S.'s supply of oil. JP Morgan financed railroads and banking consolidation. Um, I think Rockefeller did horizontal integration, which is you beat out all the competition in one sector. Oh, really quickly, Carnegie had the gospel of wealth that like people who are wealthy should give back to society. We get into labor, immigration, and reform. So, by the way, we have the formation of our first labor unions with the Knights of Labor and stuff like that, because they protested against long hours, low pay, child labor, bad conditions. We have a bunch of economic crises with the panics of 1873 and 93, which worsened wages. Wealth gaps still went up, even though, like, obviously the richer are getting richer, or the rich are getting richer, like Carnegie, etc. Yeah, Knights of Labor AFL formed. Problem with these, they're very exclusionary. Not everyone gets to join, so they're not super effective. We get the Homestead strike and the Pullman strike, but typically, like the company would win out anyways, and they wouldn't get to fight back. Typically, I think the Pullman strike ended in like an injunction, which was pretty bad. We get immigration issues. A bunch of people are starting to come in for because their countries they're in poverty. There's typically wars going on in those countries that they're coming from, persecution, like the Jewish pogroms from like I think it's Russia or like what will become the Eastern Bloc, something like that. They wanted freedom, jobs, land, economic opportunities. So that leads to ethnic enclaves, think Chinatown in Little Italy, nativism backlash, specifically in the Chinese Exclusion Act. We get populism because if we remember, the railroads are taking people's houses and stuff. Farmers aren't getting enough money because people aren't buying agriculture on like all the panics, inflation, etc. So in the Omaha platform, we see that they wanted the direct election of senators, railroad reform, free silver, and the income tax. Even though the populists they lost every election they tried in, their ideas still endured, which we'll see in progressivism here. Before we get into that, we have American imperialism, where racing become a big power in the world. Um, this idea is justified by social Darwinism, the idea that we're better than others. Like if you're good in society, that means you have a white man's burden. We want to expand economically because other countries were they had a lot of colonies and we had opportunities to expand. We had Mahan's naval theory, which said that uh, a country's like power is based on how good their navy is and how much control they have over the sea. Ideas of yellow journalism and romanticism about foreign adventures. We get the Spanish-American War, where we pretty much beat them after the USS Maine incident, where it exploded off the coast of Cuba. Um, we win in the Philippines. Barbados, I think we staged like some overthrow. I don't remember. Probably not that important. Um, yeah, we got Cuba with the Platt Amendment, where we basically like enslaved Cuba. We got Puerto Rico. We annexed Hawaii for sugar plantations. In this time period, obviously, there's backlash to like every issue. So we have the Anti-Imperialist League opposing expansion. We get progressive reform based on muckrakers that expose corruption, bad food standards, etc. So we get Teddy Roosevelt, who's the trust buster. He implements a lot of consumer protection as well as antitrust legislature, like the Clayton Antitrust Act. Or sorry, that's Wilson. I think he does the Sherman antitrust one, but that kind of fails. He's a big nature conservationist. We got Woodrow Wilson, who establishes some more stuff. He establishes the Federal Trade Commission, which regulates interstate commerce and business practices, clean Antitrust Act, and some new amendments, 16th on income tax, 17th on direct election of senators, 19th on women's right to vote, and 18th on prohibition from the temperance movement. Um, yeah, just like an extension of populism, if you will. We get into World War One. Remember, we're imperialists, so is the rest of the world. The main causes behind World War One, you don't need to know this too much. Militarism, alliances, nationalism, and then the assassination of Franz Ferdinand really kicks it off. The U.S. doesn't get drawn in until the Zimmermann telegram, and because of U-boat warfare, Germans are blowing up a bunch of our stuff in the ocean, specifically the Lusitania ship. Makes us really angry, but we don't do it until we discover the Zimmermann telegram, which was intercepted by the UK, or maybe they're still Great Britain at this time period, where Germany told Mexico to invade us, and then Germany would like get the land back. So yeah, then we enter the war. On the home front, it becomes a total war. Every part of the economy and society becomes focused on fighting this war. We get the War Industries Board, Espionage and Sedition Acts, which is upheld by Schenken versus the United States, which says that you can't criticize the government because it's a national security issue. We have the Great Migration because of all this industrialization and rapid mechanization for war. A bunch of Southern blacks move up to the north for better opportunities, but there's still segregation and discrimination. We get our first Red Scare because of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, where communists take power. So we get scared of them. We get scared of immigrants. Doesn't really do much though. We get the Palmer raids because of that. Yeah, at the end of the war, we refuse to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which is important because it shows that we're becoming isolationist as opposed to multilateral. Woodrow Wilson, he supported his 14 points, which were basically like national or international diplomacy, specifically with the League of Nations. The Senate said that's not good because it takes away Congress's power to declare war. So yeah, we become isolated. The League of Nations fails. Europe fails. Pretty bad. In the 1920s, the economy does boom a lot. We get the assembly line, automobiles with Henry Ford's line, the radio, Hollywood, consumerism just goes through the roof. We have a credit economy. People are buying a bunch of stuff, department stores. Culturally, we have the Harlem Renaissance and flappers. The Harlem Renaissance was the jazz era. Flappers, women were being rebellious. We get the Scopes Monkey trial, which was a debate over whether their evolution should be taught, and it's basically a showdown of traditionalism versus modernism. Um, Again, KKK is still active, nativism is still active. On immigration, we get restrictions with quotas in 1924 because immigration is through the roof, as it always is. We have the Prohibition movement going through the roof. We have the Teapot Dump scandal and the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which tried to like prevent any future wars by just saying we won't go to war. It wasn't enforceable. Pretty stupid. Um, and then we collapse. The economy collapses with Black Tuesday because the market was built on a very weak foundation. It's just credits being sent out, banks sending out money, really no safety precautions. So yeah, we got the Great Depression. We lose all our money. Overproduction, speculative stock trading, laissez-faire, economic failure because the government was staying hands-off. Triggered economic collapse. Millions of people became unemployed. The banks failed. Global crisis. Europe didn't get any money from us. We were trying to help them out after the war. It didn't work. Herbert Hoover was a big mess. He tried to remain laissez-faire by saying companies would voluntarily solve this. They didn't, or at least they didn't do it well enough. And then FDR comes in, and he's promising interventionism, liberalism, um, with his three R's: relief, recovery, and reform. The big ones that you need to know, I would say, are Social Security, which provided benefits for disabled and older people. Um, what else? Works Progress Administration, which helped with jobs, and the Tennessee Valley Authority with dams and hydropower. Something controversial he did was the court packing plan, where basically he tried to put liberal Supreme Court justices or like federal justices. That backfired, obviously. There's controversy over whether these reforms actually helped with the Depression, but it did create the modern welfare state, which FDR wanted, where the government is focused on the social well-being and economic well-being. Yeah, we get to World War II. Again, we're isolationists, so we joined the war pretty late. In Europe, we have fascism rising with Mussolini and Hitler. France falls. We have the Lend-Lease bill, which said that we will send weapons to any country as long as they pay for it and pay for shipping and stuff. We don't enter the war till Pearl Harbor, where Japan attacks us. We mobilized with the War Production Board, which oversaw weapon productions and stuff like that. And because of this rapid mobilization, this is really what brings us out of the Great Depression because, again, we become a total war, the economy is totally dependent, we're pumping out stuff. It just makes sense. On the home front, where you see rise in the role of women and minorities, they're getting jobs as like the Tuskegee Airmen, who are, I believe, air bombers or something like that. We have the Bracero program, where we bring in Mexicans to keep the farms going. Women start working in factories a lot more, like for this cause. Um, and then we get some controversy with like some nativism, I guess, with the Executive Order 9066, in which we took a lot of Japanese people and put them in internment camps because we were scared of them. Um, you really need to know that like we were very important in military victories, especially in Europe with D-Day, where we took back France, basically killing the European theater, and then the Pacific theater was harder. We had to take back the island of Midway, which was halfway in the Pacific, which gave us a more, I guess, field strategic advantage, kind of like just instead of Japan coming our way. We do island hopping, where we take out weaker islands and then take out the stronger ones that are like at the center. And then the dropping of the atomic bomb really ends it. In the post-war order, the US, the United Nations forms. We get a couple of conferences to divide up Europe between the Soviet Union and the US. We obviously emerge of those two superpowers that start the Cold War. The US has its Marshall Plan to rebuild Western Europe by sending aid. And this is where the ideological conflict of communism versus capitalism comes in, manifested in the Truman Doctrine, where we said that we would support any non-communist efforts, basically like counter-communism, if you will. Formation of NATO, which was a military alliance. Um, we see proxy wars as a result of the ideological differences, like the Korean War, which comes in a stalemate. Back at home, we have the Red Scare. The House Un-American Committee persecutes people that were suspected of being communist infiltrants. McCarthyism drives a lot of fear. We have the Cuban Missile Crisis under JFK, where Cuba had a bunch of missiles. Almost everyone died. Um, but it kind of gets better with détente under Nixon, where he visited China. He tried to ratify SALT, which was a treaty with the Soviet Union. But then, Watergate. Oh, let's see. Okay. more culturally speaking, we have some domestic prosperity with the GI Bill, which provided veterans funding for or loans for like education. Suburbs are going up. We have the baby boom in the 1950s. Consumerism is going back up. We have rock and roll, new forms of music, entertainment, fast food, movies. Eisenhower increases domestic programs through his dynamic conservatism ideas by implementing the highway or creating the international or interstate highway system, and then we have the creation of NASA, after which begins the space race because the Soviets launched Sputnik and we all became really scared. We have the civil rights movement with Brown versus Board of Education, which reversed. Plus, if you focus in, separate things are not inherently equal. With the Montgomery bus boycotts, remember Rosa Parks, Freedom Riders, Birmingham, um, the March on Washington, where MLK Jr. gives his famous I Have a Dream speech, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Black Power. Oh, this is where we get into the ideas of whether resistance should be passive versus more active. Malcolm X and the Black Panthers were militaristic, versus MLK was more about reform and protest. Vietnam is the hot topic of this period. The idea of the domino theory, if Vietnam falls to communism, everyone around them does. LBJ doesn't start fighting until the Gulf of Tonkin initiates us giving a bunch of troops and military advisors. We get the Tet Offensive from Vietnam, which really hurts public opinion because the war is televised, we're losing really bad, people are dying, which leads to a bunch of protests, specifically because of Miley. You can research that, it's pretty graphic. Then the Pentagon Papers get leaked. The government has been involved in this war for a long, long time. Nixon tries to do Vietnamization, doesn't really work. We actually like start striking more after that. We eventually withdraw in 1973, and yeah, distrust in the government basically just grows in this time period through the present. Now we get conservatism with after Nixon resigns. We have the 1970s, a bunch of crises going on, oil embargoes from OPEC, inflation is through the roof. Um, this is a period of stagflation where the economy is not growing, unemployment is high, and inflation is high. We had the Iran hostage crisis under Jimmy Carter, where Iran took U.S. emissaries and held them captive until Reagan, basically because they hated Carter, I guess. But there's like something about like Reagan's campaign manager like bribing them. I don't know. Gerald Ford pardons Nixon because he didn't want his government to be focused on Nixon. Carter brokers the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt. We have the Reagan era, which is this completely new radical republicanism under the new rights, which is basically like Christianity on steroids. We have the ideas of Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, supply-side economics, increased supply, increased demand by giving tax cuts to the wealthy, deregulating the economy, back to laissez-faire kind of thing. But we do spend a lot of money on the military with the SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, which basically ramps up the Cold War even more. Um, we have the Iran-Contra scandal, where we illegally funded Iran with weapons, so that way we would get money to pay Contras in Nicaragua to stop the communist overthrow. In the USSR, they start collapsing because Gorbachev, I mean, the economy is just doing bad in the USSR, but Gorbachev tries to fix that by implementing capitalist things through perestroika, and then Glasnost tries to be transparent by making a more liberal society. Doesn't work. The Berlin Wall falls in 1989, and the USSR is basically done. After the Cold War, we have the Gulf War. We get involved in the Middle East to liberate Kuwait after Iraq tried to invade. We have more government controversy. Bill Clinton gets impeached but not removed after some sex scandals. We have the Al Gore versus George Bush issue. Their election was settled by the Supreme Court, which was a big controversy. 9/11 leads us to the war on terror. We spend a lot of money attacking Afghanistan, Iraq, which leads to the Patriot Act, where increased government surveillance on United States citizens increases controversy. We get the 2008 housing crisis, which leads to the Great Recession. Some bailouts happened from billionaire, or was it Dodd-Frank that did it? I don't know. But a bailout by a millionaire or something, which seemed controversial because the economy becomes contingent on like wealthy people, which most people don't like. The economy shifts to technology services. Under Obama, we get the Affordable Care Act and the Iran deal. Trump, we have tax cuts, immigration bans. He gets impeached twice. With the rise of more social movements like Black Lives Matter, hashtag Me Too. polarization goes up, etc., etc. Yeah, the big picture for this time for like Unit 6 through 9, Reconstruction to Present, America is always undergoing industrial transformation. There's always reform movements going on for equality. There's different debates on how to do that. Women rights, black rights, always are like a struggle to get better, but they eventually do. Federal power gets expanded, but also controversial, and we become a global superpower, and that gets manifested in a couple different ways. You know, the different ideologies that go on through this, like isolationism, imperialism, and how the economy changes. Yeah, that's it.